It was a cold January night in Brampton, Ontario, when a frantic 911 call pierced the silence. The voice on the other end belonged to a terrified 22-year-old woman, Anita Suman. Through trembling lips, she begged for an ambulance and the police. Her voice was sharp with panic, her breaths heavy. The address she gave led paramedics to what appeared to be an ordinary home on King Knoll Drive. But the moment they stepped inside, the illusion of normalcy shattered. A woman lay drenched in blood. Nearby in the kitchen, a man clung to life, soaked in crimson. The woman was Anita Suman, 51. The man was Gersharon Duval, 66. Both had been brutally stabbed, multiple times, violently. It was not a random attack. This was something far more intimate and deliberate. The paramedics rushed them to the hospital, but it was too late for Anita. She died on the way. Gersharon, too, succumbed to his wounds soon after. Brampton had witnessed a horrific double murder, and the person who called for help was Anita's daughter, who had just watched her mother die inside their own home. But who was the killer? That answer came sooner than expected. Sonali identified the attacker without hesitation, Iqbal Singh Gill, a man who wasn't a stranger. He lived in their house. On paper, he was listed as Anita's husband. But that wasn't the truth. He wasn't her legal spouse. He wasn't Sonali's father. He was something else, something much darker. And now he was gone, disappeared from the crime scene before police could arrive. The next morning, detectives launched a manhunt. They issued a warrant for Iqbal Singh's arrest, but they wouldn't need to look far. Just days later, Iqbal walked into a police station and surrendered. His calm demeanor sent chills through investigators. He didn't resist. He didn't run. It was as if he had already accepted his fate. But the more the police dug, the stranger it got. Iqbal wasn't just a killer. He was also living in Canada illegally. His deportation orders had been issued 10 years earlier. 10 years. That's how long Iqbal had managed to remain in Canada, despite multiple deportation orders. In 2003, he arrived from Punjab and applied for refugee status, claiming his life was in danger back home. The Canadian court rejected his claim. Then he tried again, this time through a spousal sponsorship. He claimed to be in a common-law relationship with Anita Suman. That, too, was denied, not once, but 3 separate times. Yet each time he stayed. Bureaucratic failure or manipulation. To understand why Iqbal killed Anita and Gersharon, we must first understand who he was, and how he embedded himself so deeply into Anita's life. Anita wasn't just a random woman. She was a strong, self-made immigrant from Punjab who had survived immense loss. In 2004, her husband Hussain Lal died from cancer. She was left to raise her children alone, Sonali and Rinku. Anita picked up the pieces of her broken life and tried to move on. But that very strength may have been what made her vulnerable to someone like Iqbal. Iqbal Singh first entered her life as a truck driver hired by her late husband's company. He seemed loyal, hard-working, and desperate for help. When he told Anita he was trying to become a permanent resident, she agreed to help him. Some say she did it out of kindness. Others suggest it was a calculated risk for both of them. What followed was a tangled web of fake relationships, rejected marriage claims, and shady immigration documents. Iqbal moved into her basement. They presented themselves as a couple. But to Sonali, it was all a lie. Years passed. Anita kept trying to get Iqbal legal status, but every application failed. Behind closed doors, tension grew. In January 2013, Anita filed a domestic violence case against him. She claimed Iqbal had beaten her while drunk and threatened to kill her. A restraining order was issued. He was not allowed within 100 meters of her home. But somehow, months later, he returned. Not only was he living there again, but Anita seemed to welcome him back. Why? No one knows. Maybe fear, maybe guilt, maybe manipulation. If only the story ended there. But tragedy struck again in April 2013. Anita's son, Rinku, her pride and joy, was a licensed pilot working in the U.S. His dream was to fly a Boeing 747. That dream died with him when his cargo plane crashed. Anita was crushed. Already fragile from years of struggle, Rinku's sudden death pushed her into deep depression. She stopped talking, stopped smiling. And that's when Iqbal, once again, became part of her world. Heartbroken, but determined to stay busy, Anita opened a clothing business with the help of Gursharan Duval, a family friend. They set up a boutique corner inside his store in Mississauga. Gursharan supported her emotionally and professionally. Maybe that's what triggered Iqbal. Maybe seeing Anita rebuild her life with someone else was unbearable. Or maybe he knew his time in Canada was running out. His final application had been denied. Deportation was imminent. And then came the night of January 21st, 2014. What really happened inside that house that night? Why did Iqbal snap? And was it truly a crime of passion, or a long-brewing plan for revenge? It was 9:45 p.m. on January 21st, 2014. The Suman household was winding down after dinner. Anita Suman was in the kitchen, chatting with Gursharan Duval. They were discussing fabric orders and business plans, mundane things that gave Anita peace amidst her storms. Iqbal Singh was in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, his mind buzzing. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until Iqbal heard the door open. Someone else had entered the house, and within moments, his world, real or imagined, would explode in bloodshed. According to Iqbal's police statement, he got up from the couch after dinner and walked into the kitchen to put away some dishes. What he claims he saw next, he says, shattered him. Anita and Gursharan were standing close, too close. Gursharan's hand, Iqbal claimed, was on Anita's waist. It was enough to ignite an inferno in his mind. Without a word, Iqbal lunged toward a kitchen drawer, grabbed a sharp knife, and in a violent rage stabbed Anita again and again. She screamed but couldn't escape. And then he turned on Gursharan and did the same. Was it jealousy? Was it years of humiliation erupting at once? Or was it all just an excuse? There was someone else in the house who witnessed it all. Gursharan's nephew, who rented the basement room, saw the chaos unfold. He didn't try to fight Iqbal. Instead, he ran, terrified for his life, locking himself inside his room in the basement. Upstairs, Sonali was in her bedroom, unaware that her world was being torn apart just a floor below. The sounds she would hear next would never leave her memory. Screams, thuds, the horrifying silence that follows violence. The next morning, Iqbal didn't flee the city. Instead, he walked into the local police station and calmly turned himself in. No remorse, no panic, just a man who had done what he came to do, or so it seemed. When police interrogated him, Iqbal claimed he had no intention to kill. He said he was provoked, overcome with emotion. His lawyers would argue the same in court, that this was not murder, but a case of provocation, a spontaneous outburst, not premeditation. But the prosecution saw through it. They pointed out inconsistencies. If Iqbal had only snapped, why did he go after the nephew? The young man hadn't touched Anita, hadn't provoked anyone. Yet Iqbal chased him down the basement stairs, pounded on his locked door, and tried to break in. The court saw this as forcible confinement, a serious crime. It was no longer a heat-of-the-moment mistake. It was calculated rage. What disturbed investigators even more was the pattern leading up to the murder. Iqbal wasn't just a man who lost control one night. He was a man whose immigration fraud had been exposed repeatedly, whose applications had been rejected 3 times, whose restraining orders had been legally enforced. Yet he kept coming back. Why? Because Anita allowed him, or maybe. He made her feel like she had no choice. The court dug deeper into Iqbal's life. His refugee application from years ago had been based on lies. He said his life was in danger in India, but when Canadian immigration officials asked for proof, there was none. Then came the alcohol-related offenses, the lies about marriage, the abuse. He didn't just want to stay in Canada, he wanted control. And when Anita began building a life without him, with Gurcharan Duval by her side, something in him broke. But what was their relationship, really? Sonali Suman, Anita's daughter, had a version of the truth that shattered Iqbal's claims. According to her, there was never a real marriage between her mother and Iqbal. She says Anita simply wanted to help him as a former employee, someone who had supported the family after her husband's death. He was given a room in the basement, but there was never love, never intimacy, just a shared address for a sponsorship scheme. Anita, Sonali claimed, was trying to give someone a second chance. Sonali's words hit hard. "My mother helped him because she believed he was loyal. She never expected him to turn into a monster. She believed Iqbal used her family, manipulated the system, and when everything failed, he turned violent. It wasn't passion. It was revenge. The revenge of a man whose every door had been closed, whose every lie had been exposed, and who believed Anita was to blame for it all." In court, Iqbal's defense attorney tried one last trick: cultural justification. He argued that Iqbal, raised in a conservative Indian culture, would have found Gurcharan's touch on Anita deeply dishonorable, that it provoked him. But the judge wasn't buying it. "You're in Canada," the judge reminded, "and in Canada, we don't kill people because of imagined shame. This was murder, cold-blooded, deliberate." Despite lacking clear evidence of premeditation, the court invoked constructive first-degree murder. This legal principle holds that if a person commits another serious crime, like forcible confinement during the act of killing, the charge can be elevated. And that's exactly what happened. Iqbal was found guilty, not just of murder, but of the most serious form of it under Canadian law. But one question still haunts this case. If Anita had already filed police cases against Iqbal, had a restraining order, and no longer lived with him, how did he end up back in her house? What broke inside Anita Suman that made her let a predator back into her home? The most painful mysteries are the ones that remain unanswered. Why did Anita Suman, a woman who had already suffered the loss of a husband and son, allow Iqbal Singh back into her home, despite everything? Despite filing a domestic violence complaint, despite a restraining order, despite knowing he was facing deportation? On paper, the decision defied all logic. But trauma doesn't follow logic. And in Anita's case, the past had left scars far deeper than anyone realized. After the death of her husband in 2004, Anita had taken full responsibility for her family. She worked, managed a business, raised her kids, and even supported her late husband's trucking company. When Iqbal entered her life, he appeared to be a helping hand during her darkest hour. At first, He was merely an employee. Then, over time, he became someone she thought she could help, someone she pitied. But pity can be a dangerous emotion when it blinds you to red flags. Iqbal was persistent. He tried to stay in Canada using every trick: refugee claims, marriage sponsorships, even humanitarian appeals. Each time he was rejected, Anita gave him another lifeline. Sonali believed her mother never loved Iqbal, never saw him as a partner. She believed Anita simply wanted to repay loyalty, to help someone she saw as a broken man. But in trying to fix a man who didn't want redemption, Anita unknowingly invited destruction into her home, and that destruction came crashing down in a single, brutal night. The aftermath of the murders devastated Sonali. Within 10 years, she lost her father to cancer, her brother to a plane crash, and now her mother to murder, all before she turned 25. The home that once rang with laughter and family dinners was now a crime scene soaked in silence. Her world collapsed piece by piece, and all she could do was survive the wreckage. She told investigators with heartbreaking honesty, he was never a father. He was never her husband. He was just a lie that became too real. In court, the full weight of Iqbal's crimes came into view. His attacks on Gurcharan Singh and Gurcharan's nephew were treated as separate violent offenses. In total, Iqbal was sentenced to 18 years in prison, 10 years for attempted murder and 8 years for forcible confinement. But what about the murder of Anita Suman? That was the real question. Originally, he was sentenced to life without the parole for 25 years. But that ruling was overturned on a technicality, reducing his sentence under constructive first-degree murder charges. Legally, it meant one thing: Iqbal would eventually walk free. But what haunted the public wasn't just that he killed. It was the realization that the system failed to stop him, again and again. Despite years of red flags, rejected immigration cases, and criminal behavior, he was never deported. Canadian immigration authorities failed to act on court orders, lost documents, and allowed a dangerous man to slip through the cracks. And it cost a woman her life. Was Anita too forgiving? Was she manipulated? Was she coerced into withdrawing complaints? Some believe she still felt guilty for trying to help him. Others think fear kept her silent. Or perhaps, in her loneliness after Rinku's death, she let her guard down. Whatever the reason, her final mistake was letting Iqbal back inside her home, and she paid for it with her life. To this day, people ask, why didn't the law protect her? She did what victims are told to do. She went to the police, filed charges, obeyed court procedures. But in the end, the justice system moved too slowly. Sonali now lives with the shadows of her past. She speaks out about the cracks in immigration enforcement and domestic violence protection. She wants the world to remember her mother, not just as a victim, but as a fighter who carried her family for years before one man tore it all away. Iqbal, the man she tried to save, became her executioner. But there's one final twist. During trial proceedings, it was revealed that the marriage between Anita and Iqbal, filed in court to sponsor him, was a lie. The so-called wedding was staged, with only a few friends attending, and no legal documentation proving a marriage license. The photos were misleading. Even their stories conflicted. Some said Anita did it out of compassion. Others claim she feared him. But the truth might be more unsettling. Perhaps she was both a rescuer and a prisoner in her own home. And that's what makes this story so haunting. It's not just about immigration fraud or even murder. It's about how kindness, when exploited, can become a weapon. Anita gave him everything: shelter, support, a second chance. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Or maybe it was too much. As for Iqbal Singh, he remains behind bars, but not for life. One day, he will walk the streets again. One day, he may breathe freedom. But the memory of what he did, the lives he destroyed, will never be forgotten. And now, a question that remains unanswered. Was Anita's final mistake compassion? Or was it fear? And how many others are trapped right now, in homes, in lies, in silence, waiting for someone to believe them before it's too late? Let's talk about it in the comments.